right, today on Deep Thoughts, we're going to talk about God, or the belief in a God, the concept of a God, how man has made God very man-made. I apologize in that last one. I definitely was fighting a cold. Didn't even realize my voice sounded all gurgly. Or sounded like I just had rinsed my nose out and did the episode. How's that for an intro? God. God is a very interesting concept. And I think what's interesting about it is that man absolutely has to solve for God. It doesn't matter if you're religious and you've early adopted something that explains God, or if you're a scientist. And the whole concept makes you feel uneasy. Even your atheists who are, was it Stephen Fry? Atheists feel nervous about talking about God. Even though they want to claim and brag that they actually have no belief in God, they address the situation in a way that is almost a nervous claim that they don't believe in him. And they cite a bunch of weird stuff. And just as ridiculous as a religious person might explain God with absolutely illogical takes on everything supreme being, your atheists come up with damn near the same idiotic statements about what a creator would do and what a creator wouldn't do. So let's talk it through. Let me just tell you my background real quickly so you understand where I'm coming from. I feel like I'm blessed to have two sides of God for me. I can't say I've never been an atheist. I never was able to form an argument in my mind that would explain away God that didn't sound just as ridiculous as someone believing in God and actually never thinking about what that means. So either side of the spectrum almost has lunacy at its heart. Somewhere in the middle, I think that you actually have some uncertainty and agnostic behaviors. But I grew up being raised into a Catholic church. As I'm told, my family on my father's side actually brought a lot of the Catholic churches into the Midwest. Shame on them. Look how many little farm boys were touched by that gift to God. Now, around 8, I stopped going to church. God wasn't really mentioned much after that point, but I sort of had this belief in God, but I didn't have it in a guilt-tripping way. I just had it almost in this, I look up at blue infinite sky and I thought, well, something's going on. And without being able to explain it, the idea of something coming from nothing never made any sense to me. Now, I can say that to you very clearly now that it's become something on the internet, but I didn't know how to say that when I was 9, 8, 10, right? Somewhere in there. And then around 18, I got actually suckered into going to a church because a guy who owned a music studio, I was fresh in California. I'd probably been here almost a year. And someone said, this guy's got a really cool music studio. Why don't you come to a studio? And I'm like, sure, yeah. But the guy dragged me through a church. And the guy at the music studio actually ended up being a pedophile. It was the youth minister eventually of this church and became a pedophile. How unbelievably poetic is it that churches just attract pedophilia. It's unfucking believable. Then I became, around 93 or so, I went back into sort of my just philosophical exploration of life, and I've been there ever since. And recently I've gone to some churches. I do talk to Mormons every once in a while because I find it fascinating to hear their descriptions of their side of things. Anything that's new, I find interesting, right? Plus, I'm sort of old-fashioned. I feel like if you're going to hate somebody or something, you better know everything it is you dislike about them. And so I dislike very little in this world. But God, I did an episode on Satan, and it's actually got 2, if not 3 times the views, maybe just because of the keyword. I haven't looked at the analytics to see how it actually performs, but I found that interesting. It just automatically went past most of my episodes. But here's what I find interesting. And God is used as a manipulating force in the universe here in our world. at least by the religious communities. I can't really remember the last time an atheist used God as a manipulation mechanism. Maybe they figured out a way that I just haven't seen, but the idea is that we're part of a bigger picture. And again, if you just can think of that subject matter of something from nothing, you start to you get a little uneasy, right? You don't want to say God totally doesn't exist, but you don't want to say he does exist if you can't explain how the world is the way it is, right? Stephen Fry's argument is, and if you haven't seen that guy, he's a real famous British comedian. He's very posh. He comes from a very prestigious background. Been very successful, a very intelligent person. But even in his infinite intelligence, his reason for not believing in a creator, and again, forget the Michelangelo hand-touching creator. We're never going to be talking about that guy in any serious way. We're going to talk about that guy as it defies all logic. But go back to Stephen Fry's argument. Stephen Fry did an interview on BBC, I believe, and his whole thing was that because God allows suffering for children, there can't be a God. Now, your religious side of the fence would go, well, there's a reason for everything. Well, maybe, I guess. But the idea that if you take Stephen Fry's world and you say there is a God, according to Stephen Fry's rules, and then no child, no human being or creature on this planet could be ill, I guess up until a certain point in Stephen's world. Well, no child can suffer because God has to exist, and so let's go with 13. 13, you can start catching colds, and maybe around 16 you can catch the flu, and 20 we can get into some cancer. How fucking ridiculous is that? I shouldn't be swearing on a God episode. I'm probably going to draw in all this criticism. But that atheist view of God is got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. That somehow there's this stair-stepping thing, or we're never supposed to suffer. We're just supposed to be out here, and it's all just fun and games, which means we have no idea what is fun because everything is fun. There's nothing to compare anything to. We're all the haves. We can't lust for something because we always have it. And that is one of the most common arguments that you have from atheists. If that doesn't sound as absolutely ridiculous as the snowman in the sky version from Christianity, I don't know what does. People say life isn't fair. And I find that interesting because I think life is extremely fair. Anything can happen. And that's what fairness is. It's not affirmative action from God. Well, we're going to make the blacks have as much as the whites, as much as the Chinese, as much as No. Hey, anything can happen. And you have the power to choose. That's God. That's someone who is compassionate about creating a real environment for living, sentient souls to be, if we truly are anything divine at all. Some of us are born into poverty. Some of us are born into wealth. Some of us are born into middle class. But how about this idea? Before we move into Christianity, which I have a lot of respect for in various ways, think about us living forever, and that when we die, our mortal coil, our definition of death is the perspective of this body. I see things through a set of organic, three-dimensional eyes that have RGB in them, and they synthesize up colors, and I have all this sensation and taste and all this cool stuff. And then when this mortal coil dies, from our general relativity of our lives, I think that I've died, or I think that you've died, or I think that someone else has died. Because the definition of life is what you see with these eyes. But what if these eyes could see a soul? What if these eyes could stare at a body in a hospital, in hospice, and they pass away before your very eyes? The body itself, its heart no longer metabolizes blood. And all of a sudden you see a bed of energy lift out of that body and move up to the heavens, or move around the world, even come up to you and say hello, goodbye, wave, take off. If these eyes could see just a little bit more of reality, then our definition of death would never be this mortal coil. I think that's very important before we cross over into the naive, barely thought through construct of Christianity. Now, why would I say it like that? Doesn't that sound insulting? Aren't you ready to write somebody a letter? Get your free tomato soup and Coca-Cola? There's something very interesting about the Bible. On one side, it is, quite frankly, one of the only places in society that morality is taught. Religious books, the Torahs, some more relaxed versions of the Quran. But religion seems to be the only place that man really harvests morality and teaches it to each other. Quite intentionally, right? If a school tries to do that, oh boy, we throw up our arms, don't teach my kid about morality. Oddly enough, schools teach kids the mechanics of making babies, but never anything about the responsibility of actually getting pregnant. I think, like I've said before, The Sims, the video game The Sims, made by Electronic Arts through the Maxis company, they teach more morality and cause and effect about getting pregnant than general schools do under Common Core. It's weird, right? But what's interesting about the Bible, because you have the Old Testament and you have the New Testament, and for those of you who've never read it, you essentially have the pre-Jesus era and then the Jesus era. And what's fascinating about it is it dates the world back about 4,500 years. Who knows, man? I guess. I don't know. I think we've got plenty of proof. We went back a hell of a lot further than that, but let's just go with their story. God is consistently an immature brat in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, he's sort of just crazy and insane. And it's sad because they could just have left the morality in the Bible, and we would have been able to learn the beautiful messages that are in there and not get bogged down with this fear-mongering that the Christians tend to do, right? And again, what I'm talking about is a book that was written by one of the most corrupt organizations that exists today on planet Earth, which is the Catholic Church. At no point can the Catholic Church ever be written a blank check. They have been responsible for more molestations of children than any other single organization that we know of in world history. And yet people still keep it in existence, and they still worship the guy at the top. Even former Catholics can't say the Pope should dissolve his own church. They still write the blank check. These Christians who think they're going to heaven are writing a pedophilia Nazi war chest laundering organization blank checks. If the Christians of the world believe in the Bible, and you can still say that the Catholic Church is okay on any level whatsoever, aside from saying it should be destroyed, it should be turned off, then you're going to have a fun day in heaven. That gate with Peter, as you believe it to be, it's going to be really fun to go up there and say, yeah, well, I was naive. And you're like, well, we gave you a brain. Doesn't appear like you used it very much. So why don't you go back down and try again? It's going to be a little warmer next time. But here's where I start my belief, or my, I guess I should just say analysis of God within the Christian construct. Because again, I think that, just to fast forward real quickly here, for me, everything that they said that Jesus said, besides him claiming to be the Son of God and needing to die, and that kind of very specific button on the end of his story, his rhetorical lessons to society were perfect, were great. Everyone should know what those things are. Weird, right? But then again, there's this other belief I have that maybe we could all relax. Here's the thing, though. We know that the Bible was written over a long period of time. And we know that society was more barbaric at various stages during the writing of this. Now, I say that, but we still have the Egyptians who were seemingly massively massively civilized, 10, 20, 30, 40, potentially 50,000 BC. These guys were building sculptures that computers with 3D printers could barely mimic today. Gigantic headstones that have 100% perfect symmetrical geometry in their faces, right? But God seemed to match the maturity of man. And God always seems to match the maturity of man in everything that's written. Adam and Eve. Now, of all the churches that I've been to and the preachers that I've talked to and the individuals that I've talked to, the more naive they are as individuals, meaning I take religion out of the conversation and I put life in there and I start asking them questions to assess their maturity level of all things in life. What they would expect humanity to be able to accomplish, their selves to accomplish, how we're supposed to think. The more idealistic and childish they are, the more they believe the Bible to be literal. The more sophisticated and experienced and wise people are, taking intelligence and using it in life, which creates wisdom, right? Wisdom is intelligence experienced, right? The more they think it's allegorical, meaning metaphorical. It doesn't really literally translate to what actually happened. It's just a nice story to kind of tell you generally your relationship metaphorically with God. So we got to split Christianity down the middle. It blows my mind that in 2015 anyone believes that Adam and Eve is an actual real story, because it insults God on every single level to begin with. It insults the very foundation of the Bible. Even the allegory and metaphor is horrendously ridiculous. But let's get into it. Now, at the beginning of the world, I don't want to split hairs too much, but there's 2 or 3 versions of Genesis within Genesis about what order things were created in. I just think that right there you should know that you can't have all 3 stories being true at the same time, where man came first, then animal, then it was animal, then man, But God very evidently in the book created a flawed being, which is human. The entire rationale for creating woman out of man was that man got bored. Should have got him an iPhone, right? And he falls asleep and a rib is taken from his rib cage, which is why we have different rib counts, which I think is a great story, right? And then he creates female. And then there's this Garden of Eden they're all going to chill out in. Two people, guy and a girl, and they're going to chill out in this garden. And we already have established that they're imperfect creatures because they can't satiate themselves alone on earth. And I don't blame them, right? I'm glad he made females, let me tell you. By the way, you're going to hear me reference God as a male, but honestly, females are the ones that create beings on this planet. So I think it's funny that God actually ended up being a male, because where in society were the males? They were the most dominant, so God's obviously a male. I think that the Native Americans leaned more towards Mother Earth, which I think is a brilliant realization that women have wombs, women give birth, and God, if he's a creator, would be a woman. Or he's some hermaphrodite strange thing that he can have sex with himself. Isn't that weird? I mean, literally, he would have to be sort of like the man-woman thing. He's an it or something. I don't know. So God creates this very imperfect creature, which is us. And it's cool because it gives us choice. If we're perfect, we'd be like him, and we don't need to be like him. It's better to have mystery and magic every once in a while. Every time we're reborn, our brains reset in terms of what we know. But maybe the soul pattern gets more and more sophisticated the more it lives, and therefore we have old souls, like we always say, and we're able to traverse new things a little bit easier. Maybe it's even a little familiar. Who knows, right? Maybe a natural talent is how many times your soul's come back and done that one thing before. I always play piano. Now I'm getting good. Okay. But this Garden of Eden was very interesting because it had this one perfect rule in the center of the garden. And, God said, hey, don't break that one rule. Don't eat the fruit off that tree, which is just, come on, it's an apple. It looks delicious. And forever is a really long time. And, of course, because Christianity wants to teach that women are stupid and gullible and da-da-da-da and da-da-da-da, they said a woman talked to a serpent in a tree, which I think it's very fascinating that, ironically speaking, there's a serpent in the first story of the Bible, when the serpent is always the devil. So to set this story off, There's a devil in the first scene of this movie. And supposedly, we are supposed to trust the rest of the movie. When the controlling idea from our script, called the Bible, was set in motion by the devil. I think that's a big clue. Okay? I think it's a massive clue of what's about to come in this book. I think it's a massive clue of what's going to come for the people who follow that book. It's very interesting. So the woman eats of the apple, and what happens? All fucking hell breaks loose. What a crime. You took a bite out of an apple. That's your sympathetic, infinitely forgiving God that makes it so you can't eat one of the most luscious, beautiful things on earth. And I'm pretty sure the apples in Eden tasted awesome. You can say that metaphorically too. What goes down from the very beginning? Women now are going to have menstruation. You women got periods and you got cramps. The Christian religion teaches all women, the second you start bleeding, it's not a biological, vacation of the egg attached to the womb that needs to leave the wall of the uterus, right? It's nothing scientific. It's all, I am punishing you. I am God, and you women need to be punished because you ate an apple. I'm punishing you because you ate a fruit. Let's just let that sit in for a split second, how utterly ridiculous this man who wrote that story is to say women deserve this. And what's the other one? The other one is painful childbirth. I guess if you didn't eat the apple and you screwed, then kids were going to come out and it was going to feel like a good bowel movement. It's going to feel amazing, boom, you had an orgasm every time you had a child, right? Let's be happy that women don't have massive orgasms when they have kids. Otherwise, this world would have 50 billion people in it in the first year. Serpent is in the tree. Eve talks to Serpent. Serpent convinces her to partake of the apple. As a result of eating a fruit off of a tree, God's whole master plan, his infinite intelligence is to say, create a flawed being, give them a perfect rule. We know that mathematically speaking, those two are going to collide. And people will say, well, that's what he meant to do. Okay, dumb human. All right. Please don't crawl more into idiocy to explain idiocy. Right. Two ignorant thoughts do not make a smart thought. And that's the argument of the whole God meant to do this bullshit. Right. What else happened? Oh, they all of a sudden realized they were naked. And it mattered to them. The only thing that matters to the mind on the level of nudity would be pattern recognition. If you were born into born into a household, and your parents raised pink elephants, and there's always a pink elephant in the middle of the room, always, 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 then it would never, ever surprise you to find a pink elephant in the room. It's only if the pink elephant is there one day and you hadn't had any pink elephants in your house that you would ever notice it and be shocked about that, right? So nudity makes no sense. These two people have been nude their whole time. Well, whatever. You got those bits coming out. I got bits going in. Whatever. What isn't clear is that they did live a certain amount of time, according to the story, in the Garden of Eden, and I guess they never copulated. They never touched their own junk during bathing and thought, oh my God, that feels a little bit good right there. Here. When I was a little kid, I shouldn't tell this story, but let's put it this way. I had a couple close encounters before the age of 8 with little girls, including without anyone telling us, without us ever seeing anything, trying to put parts inside parts. Is that not crazy? But that's just natural. I now know for a fact that by the age of 7, my body, by the way, I was not the aggressor. The girl was the aggressor. The girl was all the girl's idea, believe it or not, right? But we had a close encounter of the sexual kind. 2 different girls when I was a kid. It's nuts. It was all natural. It was sort of a rite of passage, right? Like birds flying or crawling up in my tree. It sounds like a raccoon up in there, but it's broad daylight. So the devil's in the first story. Now, if I started a movie like that, a lot of you clever movie watchers would start to think, whatever happens in this film, let's just remember that the devil was in the first scene. That all the thought process and cause and effect was based off of an encounter with the serpent. A being that is clever, right? Again, I'm making this episode because it's a counter episode to the Satan episode. When you're young, Satan is taught to you as this sort of gregarious, huge being that was always big ideas. You're going to sell your soul to me and go to hell after it's all over. And it's sort of the Faustus storyline, right? But as you get older, if you still want to put a metaphorical being on top of all things that are negative, you have to refine your definition of a devil to subtle things. You were going to do this little thing that would have improved your life, this little thing, but you didn't do it because, hey, you talked yourself out of it. Reruns of Friends is on, so we're going to really use our time wisely on this planet, not actually write the book or paint the painting or do the drawing or sing the song or do the work that's going to make you more successful. It's this other little pastime. Crawl into your iPad and mess around on Facebook for hours and hours and hours and hours until your life just disappears, right? But that very inceptional story should prove to any rational human being where that story came from. And it came from man, 100% man. But we know the Bible is an encoded, multi-layered book. People who wrote it and refined it over the years have added messages in it, clues about who wrote it, what its objective is. What I always find interesting about the Bible, and I'm going to fast forward just for a split second, then we'll rewind. I think it's one of the letters to Corinthians with this guy named Paul. We're going to beat him up a little bit too. That women are still supposed to sit down and shut up. And women are supposed to talk to their men. If a woman wants to say anything in church, she's supposed to tell her husband. And he decides whether or not his wife's idea is good enough to share with the rest of the church. And he will bring it to the church, and he will evangelize it to the church. So even in the New Testament times, women were still less than men. Any of you are frustrated with the way women think? Well, you got a religious apparatus on top of them, keeping them from thinking thoughts for thousands of years. So if we talk about them behaving like men, or why they don't behave like men, okay, it's because we force them to not be able to think. And so if we want to pat ourselves on the back for the way we think, which, there's some things men do well and some things men don't do well at all, and vice versa for women, we're damn near equal in our weirdness, right? I think we probably are equal in our weirdness, but who knows, right? Equal is a relative concept, right? Now, there was a movie called The Last Temptation of Christ. And if you haven't seen that movie and you want to see it and you want to have an amazing experience, then I don't know what to do about listening to the rest of this section because I have a spoiler for you. But it's the story of Christ. Willem Dafoe, one of the greatest actors to ever live, plays Jesus. It's a Martin Scorsese movie. And this movie came out and it got just lambasted by the public who'd never seen it, especially the Christians, obviously. But the story is about Christ being crucified. And it's a beautiful recreation of the crucifixion phase. The one that Mel Gibson created was just a brainwashing movie that puts you in trauma, okay? They beat up Jesus in Mel Gibson's movie. They beat up Jesus horribly so that your brain would go into fight or flight. Your frontal lobes constrict out all the blood, so you have no discernible method of taking in the rest of that film. And then he pumps your mind full of the traditional Christian beliefs because the Gibson family is extremely religious, and he was, I think, doing this as an homage to his father. But The Last Temptation of Christ does a very, very, very brave and interesting thing. And it's actually pro-Christian, to believe it or not. But what happens is that Jesus gets crucified. A little girl comes up to Jesus, and she's the sweetest looking little thing, little blonde-haired girl. Don't mean to say blonde hair is angelic or anything, but she just looks sweet and looks nice. And she says, your father is now satisfied with your sacrifice, and he's going to take you down off this cross. And you can now live your life. You've now done what you needed to do. You were supposed to be crucified. You know you were supposed to be crucified. Now it's complete. Come on down. And Christ comes down. And Christ heals. He heals pretty much like a normal human being that's had spikes through his arms and through his wrists and through his feet. And he marries Mary Magdalene, and he actually has a polygamous sort of arrangement because there's another woman involved. And believe me, that was the way you worked it back in the day. Everything was polygamous back in the day because no one was ridiculously telling you can only be with one person. Hey, if most of us are monogamous, but hell, if you want to be with two people, what do we care, right? It's your life. It's your life, man. We just don't want to see you, holding your wives at gunpoint. But Jesus has a few kids in this film. He lives a completely normal life. And then a few years later, he bumps into this guy calling himself Paul, who's preaching the story of Christ, the death and resurrection of Christ, and he's saying everything that Paul said in the normal Bible. And Jesus is like, what are you talking about? I'm Jesus. I didn't die on the cross. I'm right here, right now. I was taken down off the cross, and I've lived a completely normal life. And the guy turned to him and said, you shut up. It's more important that people hear this message than they know that you actually lived. So it's better they believed you died. And Jesus lives his whole life in this film. He becomes an old man at the very end, and he's dying in his abode. And so his wife calls in all the disciples to say goodbye to him. I forgot the gentleman that plays Judas, but he's a famous actor. And he walks in. I think the situation was that he didn't age. I think it seemed to me like the disciples hadn't aged, but Jesus was an old man. But Judas comes up to him, and of course we know Judas as being the one that was told to betray Jesus and get him hung, or get him crucified. And then Judas hung himself because he felt so horrible for enacting the plan of God, right? It just gets more weird, right? Really cool twist, though. But he says, he comes to Jesus, and he's laying down. He's all wrapped up, laying down on the ground. There's no big, Posturepedic mattresses back in that day. And he says, what are you doing here? And Jesus is like, what are you talking about? And he says, what are you doing here? You weren't supposed to live, man. You were supposed to die on that cross. That's what you told me yourself. And Jesus was totally confused. He's got gray beard and everything. And he's like, the angel took me down from the cross. My Father sent an angel and said that I had completed my mission and I'm done, right? And he says, what angel? And Jesus points off to his left, and there's the little girl sitting on the edge of the room. He says, right there. There's the angel right there. And Judas looks over at this little girl, and he goes, her? He goes, she's the devil. She's the devil, man. You were supposed to die on that cross. And all of a sudden, Jesus has an epiphany. And time reverses, and he's back on that cross. And at that moment, Jesus realizes why he had to die on the cross. Because nothing that happened after that would have happened had he not died on the cross. And I think it's a brilliant twist to the whole story of Christ. And a very brave story. And for Christians if Christians want to believe what they believe, that film, for me, was the very best story of why Jesus had to die on the cross, if what was said after him mattered, if it was really true. But let's rewind to the beginning, like I said, of the Christian belief system. Who was the first character to twist the story in the Garden of Eden? The serpent, right? The serpent is at the very beginning of the story of God. Now, if we're writing a movie, and that's the Act 1, and the controlling idea happens to be the serpent, deceiving Eve into eating this apple, then we have to assume that the serpent is the antagonist and that he is sort of the manipulator all the way down the story. And if we wanted a really cool, if we're going to go with a 3-act format, a real cool third act, which is the conclusive act of this movie, would the devil really lose power at the end? Probably not. the devil would probably be the main character, the main antagonist, all the way to the end of this film. And so you would have to decide in your film, is it a tragedy or is it a comedy? A comedy is when the protagonist overcomes his obstacle. A tragedy is when the protagonist does not overcome his obstacle. But who is the protagonist? Well, in this particular story, the protagonist is us. It's not Jesus. It's not Paul. We're watching other characters do things to call out the truth that we are trying to absorb from this story. Now, let's just for 1 second, I'm going to get back to Old Testament in a second here, but let's just go for 1 second and say, what would be the most blasphemous thing you could do when considering a relationship with God? What is it? Well, some of you might say, well, not believing in God was always considered to be the most blasphemous thing you could do. To abolish your belief in God, to say God never existed and you're just a sovereign human being on this ball. That was considered the blasphemous definition forever. But I'm going to tell you that there's one definition that's even worse. In fact, you could actually spend a ton of them that are way worse than denying that God exists. But I'm going to throw one at you, and you're not going to like it if you're a Christian. What if... Well, let's make you God for 1 second so you can understand this. You exist, and you're listening to this video right now. And we're going to measure what you think to be my sin towards you. I'm going to give you 2 things I'm going to do against you in this video. And you're God. Okay, so I'm going to go around to all my friends, and I'm going to say that you don't exist. Now, obviously, you do exist, so you're going to take maybe a little bit of offense to that. But, you're kind of like, well, I exist, so Mark's just going to lose out on everything I have to give to society. And for anyone that he tries to convince that I don't exist, well, when I do prove that I exist, well, then it's really going to be him that loses in the end. Because it's sort of a benign thing. Whether or not you exist or not, well, I'm not really saying anything bad. I'm just sort of not doing you any favors with people believing that you exist. But it's an offense towards you, but it's not the worst thing in the world, right? Now, let me commit a sin against you. Let me give you one that would piss you off infinitely. Are you ready? Now, I want you to think of me as the serpent in the tree. I'm the antagonist that was launched in this story at the very first scene. I say that for you to fix problems in the world, for you to have the closest possible relationship with your friends, that you have to kill your son to do it. I tell people that you can't think of another way to patch things up with your comrades, with your people, be it you created them or not. I say that you're so unintelligent and so non-creative and non-compassionate that you're going to take your firstborn son, your only son according to this Bible thing, right? God only has one son, right? Because that's how he multiplies, right? I'm going to tell the world that you kill children. You're going to kill your son at the age of 30-something, early 30s, right? And that's the only way you can come up with a solution. Now, how pissed off would you be if I spread that rumor about you? You got 2 choices. I say you don't exist, and whatever. As soon as you show up to the mall and start signing books, that rumor is gone. But now I tell people that even though you show up to the mall to sign those books, there should be a son that's not here, helping you get the books out of the box and load them up in your car, but you killed him. And you forced him to basically kill himself. You forced him to end his life so that you, God, could live a great relationship with your people. Oh, and we could talk about how he ascended back to heaven and he was risen on the next day and he actually still exists somewhere. You're never going to see him again, but, you're still a child murderer. Now, if this whole thing were true, as the Bible says, right? Who would have started a rumor like that? Who would put God in the smallest intellectual box possible? I'm going to suggest it was the serpent at the first story. And the serpent's going to lure you into this story by saying that your salvation is within this story. That for you to live the ultimate experience on this planet, from cradle to grave, it's going to be the serpent luring you into this better life that you think you're going to live. But you're going to have to believe that your creator is a child killer. He's infinitely smart, but he can't think of a story that a human could think of to fix the problem. Now, I think it's pretty standard understanding that if a divine being came out from space, right, and showed up, George Burns, smoking a big fat cigar, being the endearing man that he was, that he could just simply show his face and convince man that he exists. He wouldn't have to kill anybody at all. Not your son, not his son, not anybody's son. And he could get the change that he's looking for, the belief that he's looking for, the loyalty that he's looking for. But instead we have this horrific story of God killing his own son. And supposedly the devil, if he existed, would convince you that that was a divine act of wonder and amazement and fantasticness. Isn't it great God killed his only son? If there's anything Luciferian about the Bible, if there's anything Luciferian at all in this world, it would be someone convincing you that killing their child, regardless if they rose the next day, right, is a good thing. Now, it's gotten a lot warmer out here, so I'm going to do a little Mr. Rogers and swap out this jacket for a shirt. I'll be right back. All right, that's a little bit better. All right. So now let's simply dial back to the Old Testament in general. I got to flip this little monitor. It's funny. As soon as I wear a white shirt, the shirt bounces off my my little preview screen. I can't see what the hell is going on. I think I'm good in the frame. Now let's review the idea of wrath. Because we're looking for these Occam's razors. We're looking for this moment where when you remove all the other things that are going on and the any other thing you want to apply, whatever's left is what you have to actually accept. And I think it's pretty safe to say that wrath and anger is the most ungodlike emotional spectrum that any man could ever claim would be the emotions of a supreme being. Because what is anger? Anger is a lack of knowledge. Anger is not being able to foresee something occurring, and it occurs, and it makes you angry. It surprises you in a negative way, right? There's a story of Moses. And Moses goes up on a hill and has a conversation with God, and God zaps these 10 commandments into 2 rocks. If you watch Mel Brooks' version, it's actually 3 rocks, and he drops one. History of the World Part 1. Fantastic movie. Second funniest movie out there. Blazing Saddles. Best one. But Moses comes down and he shows off these tablets, and quite frankly, I think man to come up with 10 really good moral guidelines. And it was embedded in this story. And someone needed to do it, otherwise it would be law of the jungle, right? We don't want any of that crap. But the humans at the bottom of this hill had split up into 2 groups. One group that was willing to follow Moses because he simply made more sense, and another group that was worshiping a golden calf, right? I forgot the story behind the calf, but apparently God was looking for a reset. There's a couple reset stories. We're going to get into Noah in a second here. But God, Moses said, hey, anybody who wants to follow me and God, come over here. Anybody wants to follow that calf, go over there. And God spited all those by the calf and killed them all in this story. God could not have anyone on planet Earth that didn't believe in him, which is ironic because blasphemy was allowed. After that point, blasphemy was entirely allowed in the world. So you didn't have to believe in God, and God didn't get crazy and wrathful and kill you. You didn't just turn into a pillar of salt the second you didn't believe in God. You were allowed to have choice for the rest of the Bible. But at that moment, in that small collection of human beings that happened to be present, it was one of the raves you didn't want to go to if you didn't believe in the 10 Commandments. But God had no patience for man. God was not going to give these individuals any time to really go home after the drunken frat party they were having with this cow and rethink things and go, you know what, I had too much to drink and I didn't realize that this, you made a lot of sense, Moses, and, I'm ready to come over to your side. But nope, they were dead. That's the God that people believe in. A wrathful, immature child who spites his own creation. He's smart enough to create a sentient being, but he can't have a moment of patience. And he just randomly kills. If you just think about the world population, let's say the world had 1 million people in it. Well, how many people showed up to that party? 1,000? So you got maybe 750 goes over to the calf because it was the indoctrinated belief system of those people. How could you possibly blame them as a human being for continuing to believe what they were taught as childhood? What choice do you have to circumvent your belief system when it's taught to you from birth? You have none. You have no chance of changing your belief system permanently. Now, you might change, but you're always going to suspect, was it the calf? Was it the calf? Until you die and you know all things, you would still suspect maybe you made the wrong choice. It's just natural humanity. And I understand that as a very inferior human being. But God in his infinite wisdom happened to just blow everybody up that day that didn't believe in what Moses thought at that particular valley, right? In the Alameda. So I think that story absolutely insults any concept of a supreme being. But then you had Noah, which I think preceded Moses, but some of you know better. But Noah built an ark because God, again, was completely upset with where his experiment went. God, the super flawed being, couldn't quite get the chemistry right in man's consciousness. He couldn't quite get it right. He is just as flawed as man, right? He was smart enough to create the universe and earth and all these human beings, but he just couldn't quite convince humans to behave properly. Now, consequently, God never came down and talked to them. He talked to individuals according to the stories up to that point. In fact, he's telling people to kill their own son. Again, a nice little serpent subplot. God comes down and tells the guy to kill his son, and the second he's about to drive the blade into his son's heart, oh, I was just kidding. I was testing your faith. What do you think the psychosis would be in a child that sees his father try to kill him? Some of you know people, or you know stories of people that have actually been beaten up by their parents. I have a cousin that was boxed in the head by his mother. And the second she hit him in the head during an argument, when he turned around and walked the other way, he had no idea it was coming. She boxed him in the ear, and she cut his balls off for the rest of his life. He never became a man. Now, let's take that and make it his father, and he's putting a dagger right up to his chest. I've seen the psychosis of a punch to an ear totally destroy a man. What do you think a knife from your father would do to you? Who would do such a thing to a child as a fucking test to see if you believe in them? Your father's got a relationship with some other guy. And that guy tells your father to kill you to prove that he has faith to this guy. So he creates a disturbing psychosis in this child. If God ever told me to kill my kid, I would tell God to go fuck himself. And I would take whatever punishment that God thinks he needs to give to me. But I'll tell you what, I'll fucking battle that son of a bitch till the day I fucking die. If he's telling me to kill any of my children. But this is some revered fucking story in the Bible, right? Totally ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I'm just telling you some people have written horrible things about a potential creator. So I'm dissecting this so that we can all get on the same page. But Noah builds this ark because God wants to kill every single being on planet Earth. But he wants to keep around Noah, because I guess he's the only cool cat in town. Out of all the other beings on Earth, right, there wasn't one good soul besides Noah and his gang. They had pure, infinite, perfect thought. But everybody else on Earth was just a bunch of assholes, a bunch of blasphemers. And so he builds this ark, and then, of course, this miraculous thing where all the animals came in pairs. Okay. And then he floods the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Just one dude and his crew and a bunch of animals make it. Everyone else dies. Now, of course, scientists and anthropologists, they simply say, well, that's just, must have been a huge flood, and regionally speaking, wherever they wrote this story, and so they just blew it into allegory. Well, that makes a hell of a lot more sense. But what doesn't make sense to me is that we might say that and say, look, this was allegorical to explain some physical anomaly in the sky. We had a huge monsoon season or something for a month and a half. But Christians aren't willing to let go of that. Christians revere their God more through this Luciferian lens that he is absolutely this impatient, childish, murderous human who wants you to torture your children. You want to know where child abuse comes from? Where wife beating comes from? I'm going to tell you that anyone who survived these actions as depicted in the Bible would definitely be the first person to beat somebody, to kill somebody. Go study Freud. Go study the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex says that you want to kill your father and sleep with your mother. Oh, if your father's got a dagger to your heart or your neck or your face, and he's going to kill you because some arbitrary thing in the sky said to do it, that kid's fucked up for life. And of course, he's going to get everything wrong. Everything's mapped incorrectly. My father was a total asshole that needed to die because he was fucking crazy and tried to kill me. What's that guy going to do when he grows up and starts raising children and being with his wife? He's going to be lost, tormented, never understanding why such a thing occurred. Obviously, it's all fiction. It's all fake. It never happened. But some people want to believe it's true. They want to believe this Luciferian turn in the story of their creator. Bizarre, right? Now, I'm going to tell you guys a story that I almost feel ridiculous telling you. But as long as I think it actually occurred, I'm not terribly concerned. I had some Mormons come over to my house around 2011. I let them come over for about a year, about 11 months. And it's just because I didn't know anything about their religion, and a lot of my friends were raised Mormon, and man, do they hate that place. And quite frankly, I can't understand. Once I learned about them, I couldn't understand where all the hatred came from. You might disagree with them, but they're hardly a Catholic religion, right? Again, the only thing you might think is the polygamy as exercised by Joseph Smith gets a little wonky at the end, where they said he was going all the way down to 12-year-old girls. Now, by the time that guy died, the common age for a girl to actually be sold off or married off to a 40-year-old man was 14, 15 years old. So Joseph, relative to his time, was definitely dipping a couple of years down if the 12-year-old story is correct, which, again, I don't support any of that crap, but it just wasn't, this mind-blowing thing for his day and age. But that's usually where people kind of go, well, that guy was a pedophile, church movement guy. He was a Koresh that wanted to touch little girls. And Koresh was also rumored to have done the same thing, but then we think most of the things about Koresh were lies anyway. Some assassin went in there from the government and blew everybody away at point blank, and they burned the place down and cremated all the bodies to make sure that there was no evidence. Of course, they blamed the whole thing on Koresh and his guys running around killing everybody in their church. Bizarre. But anyway. But these Mormons came to me and they said, they're very devout and they believe everything I just told you, and they've spun it all good, right? And they said, this is what they always do. They always say, if you don't believe in Jesus, which I told them right off the bat, I said, I believe in the good messages that were written down in the New Testament. I think man could learn a lot about morality by continually to read this and digest it and apply it to their life. But I said, they always make you go and pray. They don't make you, but they ask you, would you please pray to God and just see what's the truth? Because they believe that God will tell you the truth. I thought, well, gosh, I pray to, I don't get on the edge of my bed and put my hands together and that kind of stuff. I talk to God all the time. Why not? Right? Maybe I'm talking to the spirits that have passed on. Maybe I'm talking to God. I don't know. I find that there are some definite feedbacks, loops that happen. If you're a scientist, you might believe I'm talking to myself, but whatever, it works. Do it because it'll work, right? So they kept coming once a week. And like I said before, we had a lot of fun with our conversations. A lot of MK Ultra stuff went through those conversations. And they're not supposed to take in any information from you, really. They're not allowed to watch television. If you want to say, oh, watch this, they're not allowed to watch anything. They're just not allowed to get indoctrinated away from what they've been indoctrinated into, right? But these kids are really good kids. I mean, they're just nice people, right? So I never, ever have had a Mormon come to my house that I thought, wow, that was a creep. That was a jerk. Never, ever. They're actually sweet people. And quite frankly, the way they manage their church, if God were really what they think it is, they do one of the best jobs. They keep their churches limited in size, and once they reach a certain population limit and they can't offset it by different shifts within the church, they build another church, which they call a ward. And so they keep the congregation small so that you get a more intimate experience, which I think is great. I hate going to these Las Vegas productions, these big giant 3,000 people churches. It's disgusting to me. I don't know why. But anyway, they said, go and pray about this whole thing. And I said, okay, all right, I'll do that. And I started doing it, and nothing was coming back. But to my surprise, this is going to sound weird. I feel weird even telling you this because I'm hardly an impressionable guy. I woke up one morning in my bedroom, and the lighting in the room was just phenomenal. It was like a Hollywood production, like a star filter, a little bit of glow in the room, and things just felt wonderful. It was like wild, and I don't know if I was in some dream state or whatever, but I continued with my day. I didn't go back to sleep or anything. And if you think you wake up and you see something amazing and you go back to sleep, then you can kind of write that off. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I really didn't get up. But I got up. And I said, the question was Jesus really the Son of God? That was the question they wanted me to ask. And the message I got back that morning was very interesting. It was sort of a rhetorical answer, which I've always assumed that if God were to ever talk to you and you were ever to ask questions to God, that because he's so wise, he, she, whatever, but because we sort of know the answers, maybe we're born with them, maybe logic just simply occurs to us at some point. I got this message that said, you have never been without me, was the message. You've always been in my hand. You've always been with me. We're never apart from each other is what the answer generally symbolically meant to me. And what that translated to me was that under no circumstance do you need salvation to me. We're always together. And at no point did I ever outsource this connection between you and I to another person, meaning the church is actually sort of pointless when it comes to trying to get closer to me. You can learn about me, but be careful, right? But we're always together. And I think that's just plain logic, right? But it was said in such a context that it made more sense to me. It was sort of a definitive black and white answer. Of course. Why didn't I just believe that before? Now, but I was supposed to ask this other question. I was supposed to get the answer to this other specific question. And so I had this feeling of almost dread at that moment. I got this beautiful answer, but I didn't get the exact answer that these kids wanted me to ask. And so I remember kind of pulling myself up in my bed, and I sent out the other question. I go, well, look, I'm supposed to ask you about whether or not Jesus is your son, whether Jesus existed, all that stuff, right? And there was a pause. And then I got back this other answer. And it said, who would want you to believe that I would kill my only son in order for you and I to be close? Who would do that? And immediately a vision of the serpent in a tree came to my mind. It was profound, brother. Let me tell you. It was profound for me to go, oh my God, this is a Scorsese film. I've been staring at this. Every time I've considered the idea that you would have killed your own son, I've been staring at the little angel in my mind, but that was the devil. And everything became clear, and everything became bright, and everything became uplifting, that there simply is a God, definitionless by man. But there is a God, there is some sort of creator, there is some sort of force that holds this place together, and that we've never been apart, and that the only person that would want me to believe that we are apart would be someone that would gain from that equation. And I think it's no mystery to an intellectual human being that the church has always wanted control over other human beings. We talk about the sociopaths that run the world, and the sociopaths that run the world are really starting from a powerless point in their life, and they want power. They want importance. They want to be able to dominate other human beings. And so they engage in the careers that give them dominance over man. And politicians, you can't get any higher than that in this modern day world, besides maybe being the ultimate bankers that manipulate the politicians. But there's only so many seats in the theater, and the seats at the political level constantly scramble because there's term limits here and there. And so at that point, a bunch of stuff became clear. Consequently, the kids came back, and I gently told them what I was told. And they essentially couldn't contemplate the second answer. But if I'm going to go down that path, which I don't go down very often, of Christianity and really holding it up, I have to take that answer and apply it to logic. It's either my brain thinking logically and giving myself my own answer, or it's truly a divine being doing something and communicating with me. And because I tend to believe, okay, I talked about this in an episode that I actually pulled because it was the first time I used the camera, and I didn't use a mic. And I believe it was like Good and Evil or something like that. And I talked about my belief systems, which is that I think we recycle. I think we actually have to be in this birth, death, and resurrection through reincarnation, because if we don't, we'll go crazy. You know, being in heaven only works for people with a very small brain. It truly has. It is a person that has never, ever, ever contemplated the philosophy of heaven. And if you were the creator, that you would ever want your kid to be in some static form of, just eat cake all day. That's going to be great. You'll never gain weight, and cake will always taste good constantly, right? You'd have to be in some ultra drug-induced robotic brain to think that that's heaven. And this is why the Buddhists say that nirvana is hell. Nirvana isn't heaven, it's hell. Being stuck in one state is hell. But being reborn, which is weird because for the Christians, they believe it's blasphemous to think that you're reborn. It's somehow an insult to re-experience the creation of God. It's, being alive is this cherished thing. We must live every second and live a good life and be good to each other. But to do it again is a sin. How utterly fucking crazy is that? How did that become a sin, to simply live again? To believe in Santa Claus again? To believe that someone could take your nose off and pull a coin out behind your ear? To believe that Santa Claus is going to drop off some goodies for you? Oh, that last one makes you a materialistic kid, but regardless, why being a child again would ever be bad? Why having kids again and having another set of children, having a different spouse, different relatives that you miss, different friends that you miss? And then maybe after you pass away, there's a little party that goes on. You can choose when you come back. Maybe you don't immediately come back. Maybe you chill out with all your relatives for a few hundred years until, again, the maturity of what needs to occur starts to really sink in. You're like, I think I need to go back down. I've watched my kid finish her life. She's now up here with me. We watched her kids together, make sure they lived a good life. We try to inspire them and give them intuition. They won some, they lost some. Some of our kids got killed early, but, as soon as they died, as Stephen Fry's worried about, they died from this really crazy illness. They immediately came to us, and we took care of them. And maybe we finished those little kids' lives up there in heaven, or wherever the hell this mezzanine place is. If heaven exists, it's got to be just kind of a holding area where we actually kind of chill out and maybe get some knowledge that we always wanted to know. Did dinosaurs really exist? What did the brontosaurus really look like? How did the earth create itself? Are we on a flat earth or a round earth? You answer all those questions while you're up there. And then, you come back down, and of course, your knowledge has to reset. Because otherwise you become the Q continuum guys that want to commit suicide because they've lived every moment of life, right? Now, I had another experience that I talked about with Kyle on an episode we probably retired. But I think it's sort of, it's one of these weird stories, man. And again, I feel a little crazy telling you guys this stuff. And I'm not just playing you for a little more listenership. Only probably half a dozen of you make it this far in the video. But I woke up one morning. It was bright. I got up in the morning and I felt a little strange. And I felt strange because I had no pain in my body. None of that morning get-up pain. I didn't feel tired. I wasn't shaking off the old, tired feeling, the cloak that gets put on us at night, all those chemicals that dump in our brain that make sure that we woke up, perhaps in a precarious situation that our bodies didn't move real fast, right? they've studied monkeys. Not that I think we come from monkeys, but they study monkeys, and they wake up slowly because they're sleeping in trees half the time. And so if they were to wake up really fast and roll around, they would fall out of the branch, right? So humans have the same metabolism. Probably all creatures do. And wake up, we're a little bit slow. We got to find out where we are, you know? So I didn't have any of that. I woke up, and I just felt weird. And I didn't understand how I felt until I got up. I'm buck naked. I'm walking down my hallway. I got to basically take a left, walk down the hallway, take a right, and go into my master bedroom. And I walked down the hallway, and I stood at the end of my hallway, wooden floors. I'm staring at basically a cabinet at the end of my hallway. I got my office to the left, another room to my right. And I started to feel like sort of the Being John Malkovich movie, where you're sort of looking out the eyes of your body and something else was controlling me. Now, it wasn't controlling where I walked. I chose to walk down that hallway, and I stood and I stared at the end of the hallway. But all of a sudden, I became aware of another being, that's all I could say, that was essentially controlling me. And it was sharing the thoughts. It was having the predominant thoughts, and I was looking at those thoughts. It's very hard to describe. But again, now I'm standing up. I'm probably 44 years old at the time, 43, somewhere in there. You know, I have a pretty healthy body. I don't wake up with like massive aches and pains, but I definitely had no pain. It was euphoric. It was amazing. It was weird. And I don't do drugs, so there's nothing like a residual drug coming to visit me and saying, oh, you're going to feel good for a little while, for 10 minutes or whatever. But I'm standing there, and all of a sudden, I had this feeling, this voice was doing its own thing, and it said, isn't it funny how these humans live? It didn't really say humans, but it's like, it didn't really say you. It just was doing an obtuse thought about the world. And all of a sudden, my house, in my mind's eye, became this sort of cartoony caricature version of itself. Still photoreal, but it was on this very small ball. And it was just sitting up there, and the voice inside me said, isn't it cute how they build these homes that makes them feel so secure? And all of a sudden, I felt like a weird little rat in a cage, not trapped or anything, but sort of silly that, yeah, I do believe that this home gives me this incredible comfort from the outside world that is full of threat and weather and animals and predators and all that kind of stuff, right? But it was very, very sweet thought process. It was very nice, you know? And now all of a sudden I'm sort of waking, you know, I wasn't asleep or anything, but I started to kind of become conscious that I'm sharing this experience with something else. And I've never had this before. I've never had this after. And I'm just telling you because it's deep thoughts, baby. And so it was giving me this weird perspective of my existence in the universe. And sort of how I started getting this sort of homogenous feeling that we are all one. But that I'm in this vessel, and that this being, it comes from another place that doesn't have this limitation. And I remember throwing out sort of an obtuse question that said, well, where are we? What is the universe? Like you're throwing down some interesting sort of feelings that were, yeah, you've proved your point that we are a little silly with these homes that we build, but sort of necessary sort of thing. But I just threw out this thing about the universe, and I sort of had for a split second this fear of the answer. You know, you're going to show me the total perspective vortex, as Douglas Adams said, where you get to see yourself in relation to the universe, an infinite dot on an infinite dot, infinitely small, infinitely insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And it was like I caught the attention of this being that was sort of having thoughts completely on his own, right? And all of a sudden the universe, I shit you not, it went from infinite out of my peripheral vision, and it came down, and the being was basically going, oh no, there's nothing to be worried about. Let me show you the universe. And this ball, this transparent glass ball, went whoosh, right in front of my mind's eye, right? So it wasn't there, but it was there, right? It was inside my consciousness, not out there like a projection I could see. And I remember looking down, I'm technically looking down at the drawers where I keep my towels, right? And I was like, I saw this ball floating. And all of a sudden I had the most comforting feeling about infinity, that everything is okay. You know, there's no promises. It wasn't like you're not going to get hit by a car in the next 5 minutes when you walk out of the house, but it was like, this is the universe. And see, it's simple. It's beautiful and it's perfect, and you're in it. So enjoy it, right? So I turned the corner and I walked through my master bedroom I was sleeping in my guest room. And I walked into my master bedroom, master bathroom, and now I remember skipping my toothbrushing because I thought, man, if I rattle my head with the brush, I'm gonna separate myself from this being, because it's gonna be a very disorienting, shocking experience. It's gonna be a very lucid experience, and it might sever this connection I have with this being. So I turn the water on, pull my towels down, get them ready to go afterwards, and I hop in the shower. And I start bathing, and my routines, my hair, then my body, then my hair. And I remember doing this ritual, and when I got done with washing my hair and put my conditioner, and I start, and I'm looking at my hands, and I remember looking at my hands, and this being was like, it's been a long time since I've been human. It's been a long time since I've been inside of a vessel like this. And he just wanted to look at my hands. He just wanted to feel what it was like to be what we are. And I can't explain it to this day. And from that moment, just looking at my hands, I went through my ritual, and the being just sort of fluttered off. Utterly weird, right? And I'm not walking around thinking I see ghosts, I guess I did meet Walt Disney at one point, but it was just weird. So within a couple of years, I've had these experiences, one because I intentionally looked for it, one because it just happened to me, that essentially always reinforce the idea that things are infinitely beautiful and infinitely wonderful. And it doesn't mean life isn't fair. It doesn't mean you can't, again, suffer a horrible death. I don't know how I'm going to die, but I know I'm going to die. This body's going to be in the ground at some point. Could be a Holocaust, could be old age, right? So what are the alternatives to this Christian thing I just took us through? Well, like I said, if you want to scientifically prove away God, you'll never do it. You'll never, ever do it. When I went through my post-church thing from, say, 8 years old to like 18, I tried to solve for God in science. I thought, man, I'm going to get into the fingerprints of God. I'm going to get into physics, cosmology. I'm going to try to go down to the most subatomic physics and quantum mechanics. I'm going to get into general relativity. I'm going to go into cosmology and study quasars, which are one of the most obscure physics-busting objects we think we can notice in space. Like, some of them are supposed to be traveling away from us at 2 times the speed of light. Some are rotating faster than the speed of light. I mean, it's crazy. It must not be happening. I don't know. Black holes, all that kind of stuff, right? And all I found was more mystery, more uncertainty, more lack of proof of anything. But at the same time, I felt like I had this sense that something was bigger. And, there's this whole thing about God being believed in because inferior human beings believe that they need to have something over them. And I think that's ridiculous. I think that God is merely a question that we all want to solve for. Because as long as you're a human being and you can sit in a chair or stand up and look at an infinite blue sky, we have questions. There's this huge movement right now, and Kyle and I are going to do, hopefully, our 100th episode. We're going to hopefully film it next week here. I have to drive up to him. We're going to do a whole episode on Flat Earth. And I've been dying to do a deep thoughts on Flat Earth, but we'll see how the episode goes with he and I, and we may not need to do it. But the big question I had was, why would anyone want to prove the world was flat versus round? What's the big benefit there? And just to touch on like a precursor, where I think we're going to cover a lot of this stuff, but it's all coming back to religious indoctrination. It's interesting. And they're saying that if we believe we're on a round ball, suddenly God doesn't exist the way he would normally exist, the biblical existence. And they're trying to re-energize a lot of these people. And there's people that aren't religious at all that are also studying this, but they're trying to say that if we were in a flat earth plane that doesn't move in space, then everything does rotate around us. There's some sort of force field over that the earth and the sun and the moon actually hover about 3,200 miles above this plane going in a circle. And that actually keeps God closer to us. And they blame a devil for making us believe that we are less significant in the universe. Now, I think that that's a really weird argument, to be honest with you. And I'll repeat this in the other show, but And I'm not going to go into all the details and the science behind it because we're going to save that for the 100th episode. But I think that what that does is that says that God cannot engage infinity and still be God. And I think that's an absurd concept. Now, maybe their points about us being special and being more an incubative agrodome is sort of interesting idea. But what I think is fascinating is that man believes that the very next level up of creator is the creator. It has to be the one creator is above us. There can't be any civilization ahead of us. We can't have other human Homo sapiens that created this. Let's just go with the flat earth for 1 second. That if that thing were to exist, that it couldn't be some other being above us, because that would make us subjugated to some other, in our minds, equally inferior race that may just happen to have a little more technology to create this thing that we're in. Right, we're in some Truman Show. The sun is actually not the sun. It's sort of an editing bay of the show we're in. The reason why it's so bright, so you don't look at it and see the people that are running the show, right, or something like that. I'm making that up, but throughout my life, as I've definitely prayed to this central consciousness, and I always use God because it's just an easier word to grasp. I had a friend of mine that believed that, and I recently told my friend, I said, "You told me this 20 years ago," and he goes, "I did." But my buddy was a surfer, and he's a surfer to this day, and he's a scientist, he's a radiologist, and a brilliant guy. He's just a brilliant guy in general, let alone the fact that he put himself through radiology school in his 30s and nailed it. But his whole thing was, he goes, "I believe everything has consciousness." And when he told me this 20 years ago, he goes, "I believe that table has as much consciousness as we do." Of course, my scientific brain's going, "No way, he doesn't have a heart and ventricles and capillaries. No way, it's not the form of me, therefore it can't have consciousness. I'm special." And it took me about 15 years to start thinking about that and start having those other weird experiences that I had. And I was like, damn, maybe I do have it wrong. Maybe the Native Americans were right. Maybe Earth is a living being just as much as me. It just can't manifest its communication directly as I am to you. We communicate because we have the same mechanisms of communicating. My brain's having thoughts, metabolizes it into sound waves, gets picked up by this 58 mic, goes into a computer, recorded, I rendered it back out, and then you have audio devices on your end and visual devices to see me talk to you. And so we have this crazy medium that we can have a delayed communication. I'm creating this on a Saturday afternoon. I think it's October 6th. Well, hell, who knows when you watch this? But there I am, right? Phenomenal. Well, therefore, I'm special and you're special because we can communicate. But again, the awning that's casting these crazy medieval shadows on me, these Iron Maiden shadows on me, you can't talk to it. Who knows if it can talk to anybody? But we want to remain special. We're the dominant race on this planet, right? And none of us want to believe that we're not the dominant race in the universe. David Icke, who believes that I always say interstellar. That's incorrect. It's interdimensional. Reptilian race is, infiltrating the consciousness of our leaders, not the elected leaders, but the self-imposed leaders, and that all the nefarious things that happen in the world are due to this myopically reptilian mind that has no compassion, no empathy, no sympathy, and of course they're all, mathematically trying to do whatever it takes for them to keep power. I don't know why it has to go that way, but they're a threat. Just the whole concept of the story puts them as a threat because they are a dominant race, and we're afraid. We're afraid that they might do wrong to us. And no one ever, ever, ever really does a deep dive into this idea that if there were a dominant race out there that meant us wrong, that wanted to do us harm, that they wouldn't have already done it already. And I think that we can pretty much, through science, through just logic, realize that no dominant race has found us that wants to do us harm. Because this idea that they would infiltrate a few minds of humans especially and just do a slow boil on us, it's absolutely ridiculous. You want to take our resources? You want to enslave us, just like all the Nibiru Planet X crap? then they would have done it. They would have never left. They would have never got back on their planet and go around the sun again in their little micro solar system. It's all crap. Something really good is happening here. We are protected. We are capable of destroying ourselves, and we're capable of bringing ourselves to some euphoric utopia. Life is fair, but we don't want to think of it like that. And so we created these man-made constructs, these man-made religions, so that we can deal with the uncertainty. And unfortunately, what I've discovered is that by religions usurping uncertainty and providing fictional stories in the place of uncertainty, the minds of those who believe are very primitive. They don't experience much life. You know? I want to get into worshiping on Sundays. I want to get into anyone suggesting at all that God needs to be worshipped, because I think that it insults the intelligence of a creator on a massive scale. And I think that we all know it's ridiculous, but we're unable to put it into a metaphor that makes sense to us. But there's a real-world example of this constantly. I come from a family that's actually beautifully equipped to teach this lesson. Now, there's some cultures in the world that believe that you should take care of your parents, and there's nothing wrong with that. But my family is sort of the antithesis. My family is sort of one of these things of, I'm going to raise you well, I'm going to teach you what you need to know, and I need you to go out and handle your own life. And in my family, at least in my immediate family, my father and I basically have the same opinion. At no point am I here to burden my child. By the way, how metaphorical is it that my sunglasses in this shadow make a cross? It's amazing, right? I feel like a paladin or something. I feel like a Knights Templar running around. It's not intentional, Jared. But imagine this. You have children. And imagine if your children behaved like Christians behave to God, or Muslims, or Jews. I think the Jews are a little more relaxed, honestly. But your Muslims can't film anything in the world or experience any trial or tribulation in life without yelling Allah Akbar, which is God is great. It's like every single split second of their life, they're in this constant God worship. And it doesn't sound that intelligent when they sit there and just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. What's that supposed to do? God's got what, if you say it 22 times, then you're okay. You're going to be safe from the bombs coming in from these European bankers, right? But if your child were to sit with you your whole life and just follow you around constantly, worshiping you, not living their lives, not becoming anything beyond what you become by them following you around like this mother goose, I think that most parents would very quickly realize you've made a mistake, that there's something wrong with your child, that they can't go and live their own lives. They're sitting around there worshiping every split second you're alive. I don't want my kid to do that. My God, I would take myself out. I would remove myself from my child's life if she were to follow me like a Christian follows God. I may not kill myself, but I would maybe just move to another place on the planet so she could never find me again, leaving her a sweet note saying, I need you to live your own life. And at some point, if you can divorce yourself from this worshiping cycle of me, I'll come back. But until then, you need to live your own life. And if there truly is a God, there's got to be a reason why God wouldn't be here every single day patting us on the back. But I'm going to get into that as well. But I want to drive home this notion of having to go into a building arbitrarily every Sunday and having to worship God, otherwise God doesn't like you. I think it's just pure lunacy. Now, what I don't think is lunacy, is to go into a room once a week, drive your car to work, get up, take a shower if no one's in the house, and you can pray to God and just simply say, and pray is what a relative term, have a conversation with God, and simply say, you know what, I really like what you've done here. And I appreciate the opportunities that I've been given. And you know what, God, I'm going to try to be the best human I can be, because I think you gave me life and you sustained my life for a particular reason. And I don't think, like I said in my previous episode, I don't think you want me to come here and be a trivial human being. I think you want me to be something special. And that's going to be really tough because there's a lot of human beings competing for that special slot. But the nice thing is God gives us the idea. I'm just going to go with the belief of God here for a second. God gives us the ability to have original thoughts, truly original thoughts. Even if we're combining two pre-existing thoughts to create an original thought, there's something really cool about that. I think if there truly were a creator, we'd have to assume that the creator has at least as much intelligence as we do, and we wouldn't want our children following us around the whole time. Interesting, right? Doesn't mean you can't live for the opportunity to be human at this particular juncture. Who knows if we're some other alien race next, we're coming back as humans. Maybe we are the only thing that God's ever taken any time to create. But given all the tens of thousands of hundred thousands of species of things on this planet, maybe we can come back as a chair. Who the hell knows? I'm certainly not going to throw down on that, right? Now, since we're on the subject, I'm going to repeat a story. And from the devout listeners, you're going to roll your eyes because here comes the story again. But since we're on the subject, I always try to create like a compartment of information that goes together. So that's why sometimes I repeat things, and I apologize for anyone who hasn't heard this before, or has heard this before. If we're trying to talk about this reincarnation thing and what goes on after life and death, I have this experience, which I just referenced a minute ago. I'm sure some of your ears perked up and you're like, what? And I just went on with my conversation. So let me get back to it. I had a very definitive experience at Disneyland, which is going to sound utterly absurd, and believe me, I believe this sounds crazy, but under no circumstance can I scientifically describe an alternative belief as to what actually occurred besides the supernatural thing that we might call, or the paranormal thing that actually I think occurred. And again, we did a whole episode on ghosts, like I said, episode 99, and I lost the freaking audio file of it. It was horribly mulched. My voice was going to sound horrible the whole time, so it's not really a loss, but out of 170 episodes I managed through this channel, because I do all the editing of everything that we create, I lost this freaking audio file. I thought I backed it up because I had my laptop over there and I dragged it to my main computer. And I went to Disneyland with my girlfriend at the time. And when you go into Disneyland, if you haven't been, there's two entrances. Once you go through the gates with your tickets, there's two entrances. And there's the railroad tracks to go over. And there's a tunnel on one side and a tunnel on the other side, right and left. So I went to the right side. And at that point, the bank where you bought your season passes and did any coupon exchange was over on the right. But there's also a bathroom right on the right side that's usually for the cast members, but certain people know it's there and you can go in. And it used to be the cleanest bathroom. It's not the cleanest anymore. But my girlfriend and I had season passes, and we had this ritual. We go to eat dinner and ride a couple rides and come home. And it's early. It's probably like, I know it was still bright out and it was December, so it must have been around 4 o'clock or so. And we walk in. And just prior to going to Disneyland, about a week before, I had met one of the oldest remaining Imagineers by the name of Bob Gurr. You can look him up, Gurr. He's got a Facebook page, Wikipedia listing. You can see the guy. And I met him at my buddy Sid Mead's place on Christmas Day, and I had this incredible conversation with him about Walt, and he got all choked up about it, and it was really phenomenal. And so I met this guy, and it was amazing. He gave me a DVD that was the making of Pirates of the Caribbean, which is a phenomenal story, told by all the Imagineers that made the place. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm just standing, just stoic, looking straight ahead, people watching while she's going off to the restroom. So I'm standing there, and I kid you not. I mean, I think if you've watched any of my shows, you know I'm hardly an impressionable guy. And, I don't know, I always try to disclaimer this because this is not something I would have ever wanted to believe, let's just say. I mean, I guess I wouldn't not want to believe this. It's kind of a neat story, but in my mind's eye, just like that hallway thing, walks up Walt Disney. And he looked like he was in some sort of like late 1920s outfit, like you see in the books. He had a little bit of a coat on, and he had, I swear to God, a cigarette in his right hand. He dyed his cigarettes, right? And he just walks up to me. He exits to my left, but he walks up to me and he goes, "Hey, Bob Gurr's over there. You should go say hi." And he walks to my left, and he just disappears. And I'm like, I didn't know this was going to happen, so I had no means of like paying attention or following him with my eyes or anything like that. I was just like, whoa, what the hell was that? And in my brain, just like a Google map where you see or the Apple Maps where you see the pin drop, right? The little pin with a little round top on. Over there, somewhere in Tomorrowland, is this pin that drops. I'm like, whoa, this is weird. And my girlfriend comes out of the bathroom. Now, her and I are starving. We're supposed to go to Frontierland and eat the Kraft Mexican restaurant. And then we're going to walk over to usually Pirates of the Caribbean. Then maybe we do Star Tours or Space Mountain and we leave. That's usually our regiment when we just want to do a dinner. So I grab her. We go through the town circle. We go down the Main Street and we're supposed to go left, and we're starving. So there's an imperative to go do this, and we would never ever ride a ride. You potentially stand in line for 30 minutes to an hour before eating dinner, because I get cranky when I'm hungry, and she knows that. She knows I never would do that. But I said to her as we're walking down Main Street, I said, let's go this way real quick. And she goes, okay. Why she didn't protest, I have no idea. But there's only 2 rides on the Tomorrowland area that we would ride. One is Star Tours, which is right around the corner, and the other one is at the end of the road in Tomorrowland, which is Space Mountain. Well, I walk right past Star Tours and don't bat an eye. She's still following me. Don't know why. There's no restaurants on this side of the park that we like at all. And then I skip walking to Space Mountain, and I go past this Moonburger place, which is actually pretty good nowadays. And I start going up to one of the kiddie rides, which is sort of a submarine ride. And she's just following me. Couldn't understand it. Why she wasn't asking me what the hell's going on. And we walk up this hill, and right at the very top of the hill is a submarine ride, and it's been under construction for 2 years to become the Finding Nemo ride. And I'm sort of not looking specifically at anything. My mind has this pin in it. It's up there somewhere, right? And sure enough, right at the top of the hill is Bob Gurr and his buddy. And so I walk right up to Bob, and I'm like, hey, Bob, what's going on? And he recognizes it because I just met him a week ago. He's like, hey, what are you doing here? And we start shaking hands, and he starts telling me they went mountain bike riding that day, and he's 75 years old at the time. I think he's like 80-something now. And I think this is 2007, just before I went off to New York to do the New Year's thing. And I said, what are you doing here, man? And he goes, well, it's Imagineering Day, and they just about to turn on this Finding Nemo ride. The first people that are going to be able to ride it are the Imagineers. And he goes, everyone in line right there is an Imagineer. It's Imagineer Day. He says, anybody you see in the park today with this little lapel pin is an Imagineer. I said, oh my God, that's cool. I said, well, what do you, he says, well, the weird thing is that the ride's been having a problem, so we haven't been able to get on the first ride. So he and I finish up the conversation, witnessed by two other people, right? And here comes the park attendant down the staircase to Bob and says, okay, Mr. Gurr, we're ready for you. Okay, so we say goodbye and we go eat, and the rest of the night's completely normal. All right. So why was he there? Why was the ride broken? Why did the ride fix itself once we had introduced ourselves and said hello? How the hell did I know he was there? Did I have some psychic connection to Bob Gurr, a guy I've met one time in my lifetime? And how did I know where the hell he was in the park? Something amazing is afoot with mankind. Either be it Walt chills out at his own park. It's probably not bound by time. And for whatever reason, he knows I appreciate the park for the reasons he created it. He knows I appreciate Bob contributing to it. Bob did the propulsion systems for that particular ride. So he said when I met him, he goes, I did the propulsion systems for this. He also did the propulsion systems in the cars for Pirates of the Caribbean, which I learned when I met him face to face. But it proved to me, this world isn't what you think it is. If you think it's just some secular ball floating in space where, again, nothing created something. Probably the most asinine fundamentals of the Big Bang Theory was that nothing created something, The world's different than you think. And that's why I believe in reincarnation. So I think you feel me. This is a story about man's obsession with God. I don't think we necessarily believe in a God or try to manifest a belief in God simply to satiate this need for something over us. I just think that we can sense that directly over us is infinity that we can't explain. Some scientists want to kid themselves that they're completely okay with the is, and I think that's probably what it is, regardless of who did it, who made it, and who lives in it. But I think that intelligence is most definitely a collective consciousness. We have no problem scientifically explaining that the brain has a mesh of electricity that has intelligence. And I think that, some scientists believe that we genetically improve our brains and then spawn. And then those children, if raised correctly, will improve the mesh in their mind, and then they continually have genetic intelligence. They're better suited and predisposition to have intelligence because their parents took care of their brains. I believe that's probably true too. Which is why repression in the world is the biggest sin that we can do against each other, is to repress a culture away from civilized thinking. This whole immigration thing that's happening in Europe right now is becoming very evident that there's a tribe on Earth that is very primitive. and violent and entitled. But those elements exist in every culture, right? Just a little bit smaller in the first world countries. So before you're so sure about God, which I doubt anybody listening is, I think we need to look at where we're getting our information from. I think we as man can easily upgrade, the capabilities of God and the rationalizations of a God if a God exists. And it doesn't matter if you think that God is a centralized consciousness in the universe. If you believe in gravity or what have you, then energy could be subject to some sort of gathering principle. Energy, I think we've all agreed, cannot hide in the universe, so how do you actually die? If we are made of energy in this mortal coil, which is flesh and blood, manipulated by energy, as soon as this mortal coil passes away, how could the energy that made us in our brains suddenly disappear as well or diffuse into the universe? What would make it diffuse into the universe? Why would it ever diffuse in the universe? Maybe it simply travels in the universe. Most of us sit inside of our bodies and we look out at the universe and we're thinking, damn, I have another consciousness that's deep inside my mind. It seems to be unaffected by my body. I think it's maybe a good time that we expand our belief system to include a bunch of different eventualities and not sit inside either the Christian religious belief system or the atheist belief system. There's got to be something directly in the center, which probably makes more sense because the two extremes seem to be asinine on their own face value. Talk to the most sophisticated Christian and you'll hear a bunch of things that defy any logic of an infinitely patient and beautiful creature. And you look over here at the science side of things and you're thinking, wow, you're living in a little tiny box, self-serving yourself, saying that everything should be cake and pie. No one should ever have any ill experiences in the world, and that's what's going to make it fair. No, that would make it totally unfair. That would make everything positive, right? Well, like I said in the Satan episode, until man supplants Christianity, the moral fibers of Christianity was something else more formal that teaches morality. We're probably going to have to lean on Christianity and the belief systems, distilling out what makes sense, man's finest hour. And like I said in previous episodes, it's not that I don't believe the Bible has divine thoughts in it. I just think we've had a lot of bad people manage the Bible for the majority of its existence and filled it full of crazy takes so that man can dominate man. I just don't think that's the way it should be, right? Like I said, you feel me. This was a long Olivia cigar, which is why this is a long-ass episode, and I still probably have another 30 minutes to chew on this bad boy, but I'm going to stop. This is bound to create controversy. I'm sorry if it offended you in any way, shape, or form. It's not my intent. My intent is to make you sort of take the handcuffs off God that are made by man. Man doesn't seem to be comfortable with God until God really looks like a man. And I think that the more that you can separate that entity from your own predispositions, or take the finest thoughts that you might have and impose them on God, your more infinite thoughts, your more infinite concepts of patience and love and choice and cycle, I think you'll be a lot closer to whatever is out there that handles us. You know, if the scientists are correct and this is a something from nothing algorithm, all right, well, let's just be good people while we're here. If you know me, you know my whole goal in life is to make sure that we live in a better world, that if we ever do regain control of this planet, that we know what we're doing to reconstruct it. But I don't think it's going to be one apocalyptic event where we go and kill a bunch of bankers or kill a bunch of royalty or elite and all of a sudden the world becomes back to a perfect state. It's going to happen slowly, and it's going to happen through infecting each other's minds. You know, for those of you who watch and thumb this thing up, super appreciate it, but I also need your comments. Let's show the world through comments that we have a like mind. If you support me, throw in your support. If you have alternate belief systems, throw them in as well, because everything is good. We none of us have answers. I just gave you some impressionistic beliefs that I have of how the universe works based on my experience, based on my mortal mind, which is horribly flawed, right? I'm a horribly flawed, normal human being. But I can still conceive of a God that has more love for me than a Christian. And that's not to put myself above anybody, okay? I'm trying to get everyone to relax a little bit, you know? A story told by man is a beautiful thing, whether or not it has ridiculous stories or plot twists in it or antagonists, protagonists in it. But we're never going to get there if we don't open up these forbidden conversations, right? I think that God is a forbidden conversation if you're not willing to walk the razor's edge of Christianity, Muslim, Judaism, and I think we need another one. And science has taken this unfortunate tact that if you go down science's route, you must adopt this idea of atheism, which again, like I said, and I think I've proven that has its own lunacy, right? So anyway, I won't go on. If you haven't been already, go to mkultureradio.com. Everything's there. Deep Thoughts are completely unique from the rest of the show. Our Facebook page is really geared at the show that Kyle and I make. There's not a lot of deep thought posts on our Facebook page, and then we just can't cross-pollinate things. And I don't think we need to. I only have a limited amount of time to create these videos. I try to work it into my daily life. When I take a little relaxation with a cigar, I try to make a video. I won't lie, I'm definitely getting dry on these subjects. I don't know exactly where to take things. I don't want to split atoms any further than I've already split them, because I'm already repeating some of my experiences in these shows, but I hope these things are starting to land with you guys. I'd much prefer to keep things in a sort of how to improve life thing, the creative ones, the endeavors, the how-tos, like screenwriting and that kind of stuff, because I think we need a well-rounded, Trivial Pursuit wheel of different subjects that we need to talk about. But I'm only one guy with one set of experiences, so I'm not going to be able to engage you on sports or some of the things that you like that I have no knowledge of. So, again, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. As always, take care of yourself, take care of somebody else, and I will see you in the next episode. Over now.